3 weeks ago, my entire life changed in the space of a heartbeat. One moment, I was an ordinary woman sipping lukewarm coffee in my tiny apartment, worried about rent. The next, I was staring at a lottery ticket worth $62 million. But if you think this is a story about instant happiness, you're wrong. Because what came next wasn't champagne toasts or dream vacations, it was a test. A test that would reveal which people in my life truly loved me, and which ones only loved what I could give them. And the answers I found shattered everything I thought I knew about family. My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 32 years old, and until that night, my life in Denver was as predictable as the snow in January. I had a modest job, a modest apartment, and a family that was complicated, to say the least. I thought I understood the people closest to me, their hearts, their intentions. But that lottery win made me realize I didn't know them at all. And before I told a single soul about my secret, I decided to find out the truth. I've lived in Denver, Colorado, my whole life. Snow-dusted winters, dry summer heat, and mountains that look like postcards, beautiful, but not enough to distract me from the grind. I work as a project manager for a small construction company. The pay? Just enough to keep the lights on, cover my student loans, and maybe grab takeout on a Friday night if I skipped lunch during the week. My family is scattered, both in geography and in spirit. My father, Frank, remarried a woman named Linda who believes happiness can be bought, as long as it has a designer label. My mother, Caroline, married Donald, a successful restaurateur with a wallet full of cash and a heart locked shut. My older brother, Ethan, is charming enough to talk his way into any loan, and irresponsible enough to never pay it back. My younger sister, Chloe, is an Instagram influencer, glossy, glamorous, and always one sob story away from needing just a little help. And then there's Aunt Helen, my mother's sister. She lives in a tiny house in Fort Collins, retired from teaching 3rd grade. She's the only one in my family who has never taken advantage of me. She doesn't have much, but what she has, she'd give without thinking twice. Before the lottery, my life was fine. Not great, not terrible. Just fine. I knew how to survive, but I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to dream. That's why, when I found out I'd won, I didn't rush to celebrate. Instead, one thought took over: I had to know, once and for all, who in my life was real, and who wasn't. It happened on one of those bitter Colorado Fridays when the cold cuts straight through your coat and lingers in your bones. The sun had already dropped behind the mountains by the time I left work, and the streets were glowing with the dull orange haze of old street lamps. My body felt heavy, not just from the cold, but from the week, 10-hour days, endless emails, and a boss who seemed to think good job was a phrase that might bankrupt him if he said it out loud. On the drive home, I pulled into a little gas station I've been going to for years. It's one of those small, slightly run-down places that smells faintly of burnt coffee and motor oil. The kind where the clerk knows your name, your usual order, and probably a few of your secrets. I went in for my standard medium coffee, 2 creams, no sugar, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was my birthday that week. Maybe it was just muscle memory. Either way, I found myself reaching for a Powerball play slip. I've been buying tickets for years, winning just enough here and there to keep the hope alive. My family loves to make fun of it. My mother calls it a tax for people bad at math, my father gives me lectures about probability, and my brother once told me I should just hand him the money instead. But to me, those tickets were tiny sparks of possibility. One little rectangle of paper that let me dream for a couple of days. Normally I let the machine pick the numbers. Not this time. This time I took the pen and carefully bubbled in dates that meant something to me: my birthday, my dad's, my mom's, Aunt Helen's, my own. People who had shaped my life, for better or worse. I folded the ticket and slid it into my wallet like it was nothing, just part of the ritual. That night, I made a quick dinner, ramen noodles with a soft-boiled egg, and curled up on the couch under an old fleece blanket. The lottery drawing was scheduled for 8:59, but I was scrolling on my phone, not expecting anything. The first number flashed on the screen: mine. I smiled to myself. Then the second. my chest tightened. The third, my hands went still. By the fourth, I wasn't breathing. When the fifth hit, my vision blurred at the edges. And then, the sixth. My number. Every single one. I stared at the screen, then at the ticket, then back at the screen again. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I picked up my phone and checked the numbers online, still the same. I said it out loud, $62 million. The words felt foreign, like they didn't belong in my mouth. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, reading story after story of lottery winners. Some were heartwarming, but most were cautionary tales, families ripped apart, friends disappearing, strangers appearing with outstretched hands. The one that stuck with me said, "Money doesn't change people, it just shows you who they've been all along." And sitting there in the quiet hum of my apartment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I would tell no one. Not yet. First, I was going to find out the truth about my family. By the time the first pale light of morning slipped through my blinds, my decision was made. I wasn't going to tell anyone, not my parents, not Ethan, not Chloe. Not even Aunt Helen, as much as I loved her. Before I let anyone into this secret, I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with. And the only way to do that was to create a situation where they thought I needed them. The idea had taken root in my head sometime around 3 a.m., after reading a forum thread about how sudden wealth can turn love into calculation. I'd been on the other side of that equation more times than I cared to count, digging into my savings, maxing out my credit card, bailing people out of messes they'd created. They'd all promised to pay me back. Most never did. Now I wanted to see how they acted when the tables were turned. I started building the story in my head like a blueprint. I would tell them my company had lost a major contract and shut down overnight. No severance, no warning. To make matters worse, I'd recently injured my knee in a minor accident and needed surgery, expensive surgery. Between lost income and medical bills, I'd be short about $8,000. Not an outrageous amount for most of them, but enough to matter. Enough to reveal priorities. It had to be believable, down to the last detail. I made a list of everyone I would approach: my father Frank and Linda, my mother Caroline and Donald, Ethan, Chloe, Aunt Helen, plus 2 cousins who'd each borrowed money from me before. 9 people. All of whom had leaned on me financially or emotionally at some point. All of whom swore they'd be there for me. I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, jotting down likely reactions. I guessed Dad would lecture me on saving more and spending less. Mom would say she needed to talk to Donald. Ethan would probably vanish into the fog of bad timing. Chloe might post something vague about toxic people asking for handouts before blocking me. The cousins would offer sympathy but no action. The only question mark was Aunt Helen. She didn't have much to give, but she had a history of giving anyway. The next step was rehearsal. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, practicing my voice. Distressed, but not desperate. Just enough strain to be believable without seeming manipulative. I recorded myself on my phone, listening for cracks or unnatural pauses. I even prepared answers to questions they might ask, details about the fictional company closure, the surgery, the recovery timeline. I wanted this airtight. When I finally looked at the clock, it was past noon. My coffee had gone cold, and my heart was beating fast, not from nerves, but from anticipation. This wasn't just a test. This was my one chance to see my family without the sugarcoating, to watch them show me exactly who they were when they had nothing to gain. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the first name on my list. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, I pressed it. It was time to find out the truth. The first name on my list was my mother's. Caroline. We had a complicated history, warm enough on the surface, but under it, there were fractures we both pretended not to see. She liked to tell people she'd sacrificed everything for her kids, but I'd learned over the years that her sacrifices often stopped short when money was involved. I stared at her contact photo on my phone for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the call button. Once I did this, there was no undoing it. I took a slow breath, tried to feel the right amount of tension in my voice, and hit call. She answered on the third ring. Rachel? Hi, honey. I was just about to call you. I saw this gorgeous winter coat on sale and thought of you. Are you staying warm up there? Her voice was cheerful, distracted, as if I'd interrupted her in the middle of a shopping trip. Hey, Mom, I said, keeping my tone low and tight. I'm not doing great. There was a pause. What's wrong? Her voice softened, but there was still that undercurrent of impatience, like she was bracing for bad news she didn't want to deal with. I launched into my story, the one I'd rehearsed so many times. The company shutting down. No severance. The knee injury. The looming medical bills. I painted the picture carefully, just enough detail to make it real without overloading it. I told her I was short about $8,000, and that rent was due in 2 weeks. My hands actually started to shake, even though it was all a fabrication. On the other end, I could hear her exhale slowly. Oh, Rachel, that's terrible. Have you tried applying for unemployment? What about your savings? Unemployment will take weeks, and my emergency fund is gone from paying the hospital for the tests, I said, adding a note of strain to my voice. Mom, I wouldn't be asking if I had any other options. There was another pause, long enough for me to imagine her weighing the pros and cons, not of helping me, but of having to ask Donald. Well, she began carefully, Donald and I just put a down payment on the new cabin at Lake Granby. Things are really tight right now. Maybe you could call your father? Or even Chloe, she's been doing well with her brand deals. The familiar sting of disappointment bloomed in my chest. She hadn't said no outright, but she was already passing the responsibility elsewhere. I was hoping to avoid putting this on Dad, I said quietly. And Chloe's not in a position to help. I'll talk to Donald, she said finally. But I can't promise anything. You know how careful he is with money. I forced a smile into my voice. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate you even considering it. When we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my lap. I wrote her response down in my notebook, concern expressed. Responsibility deflected. Outcome unlikely. It was only the first call, and already my chest felt heavier. If this was how it started, I had no idea how much worse it might get from here. The next name on my list was my father's. Frank. I decided not to call. My dad is the kind of man who prefers looking someone in the eye when he talks, especially if he's about to deliver one of his famous lectures. So I texted him instead, "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow morning? Need to talk." He replied within minutes, "Sure." 9 a.m. at the diner. It was one of those old-school Denver diners with red vinyl booths, chrome trim, and the smell of bacon grease clinging to the air. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting with a newspaper folded neatly beside his cup of black coffee. He looked up, gave me a small nod, and gestured to the seat across from him. "You look tired," he said by way of greeting. "No, how are you?" No smile. Just an observation, delivered like a fact. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee mug the waitress set in front of me and began my story, the same one I'd given Mom. The shutdown, the medical bills, the $8,000 gap. I kept my tone measured but let just enough strain seep through. He listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed slightly. When I finished, there was a long silence. He leaned back in his seat, crossed his arms, and sighed through his nose. "Rachel," he began, using the tone he used when I was 12 and had forgotten to mow the lawn, "this is exactly why I've always told you to keep 6 months' worth of expenses saved up. Emergencies happen. Jobs end. You need to be prepared." I forced a nod. "I know, Dad, but..." "No, hear me out," he said, holding up a hand. "If you've been living paycheck to paycheck, that's on you. You've got to cut back. Cancel those streaming services, move to a cheaper place, stop eating out. You can't rely on other people to bail you out when things get hard. My chest tightened. I'm not trying to make this a habit. I just need some help right now. He shook his head slightly. Stephanie and I are focusing on our retirement. We can't afford to dip into those funds. It would be irresponsible. Then he reached across the table and patted my hand like he was consoling me. This could be a good learning experience for you. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is the best teacher. I nodded again, swallowing the lump in my throat. It was almost laughable, my father, who I'd loaned money to just last year to cover roof repairs, lecturing me about self-reliance. But there was nothing to gain by arguing. I just said, "Thanks for the advice, Dad. I'll figure something out." When I left the diner, the cold morning air felt sharper than usual. I slid into my car and just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, letting the disappointment settle in. Second name on the list, second strike. If this pattern kept up, I wasn't sure whether I'd be angry, or just numb. Saturday afternoon, I drove out to Greenwood Village, where Chloe lived with her husband, Matt. Their neighborhood looked like something off a luxury real estate website, wide streets lined with manicured trees, driveways filled with shiny SUVs, houses that looked more like boutique hotels than family homes. Her place was no exception. A modern white two-story with black-framed windows, an oversized front door, and landscaping that probably cost more than my entire car. When she opened the door, she was dressed in a cream cashmere sweater, gold hoops, and had that effortless influencer glow. "Rachel." "What a surprise," she said, pulling me into a quick hug that smelled faintly of expensive perfume. Come in, come in. The kids are at soccer practice." Asterisk. We settled into her kitchen, which looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, marble countertops, double ovens, and a massive island in the center. As she frothed milk in a sleek espresso machine, I started my story. Same script, company shutdown, knee injury, medical bills, 8,000 short. I kept my voice low, adding just enough hesitation to make it sound like I hated asking for help. Asterisk, oh my God, that's awful, she gasped, reaching across the counter to squeeze my hand. I can't believe they would just close like that. Poor you. Her sympathy felt genuine for a moment, and a tiny spark of hope flared in me. Then I mentioned the amount I needed. Asterisk. Her expression faltered just slightly, so slight most people wouldn't notice. Wow, this is actually not a great time, she said, glancing toward the hallway like she was making sure Matt wasn't within earshot. We just put a down payment on the new Tesla Model X, and the kids' private school tuition was due last week. Plus, we're redoing the master bathroom. Matt handles most of our finances, and he's really strict about our budget. Asterisk, I nodded slowly. I understand. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. She brightened suddenly, as if trying to soften the blow. Hey, maybe you could move in with us for a bit. We've got a guest room, well, it's full of boxes right now, but we could clear it out. That way you wouldn't have to worry about rent while you're looking for a new job. Asterisk. Asterisk, I smiled politely, knowing full well moving in here would be a nightmare of passive-aggressive comments and social media pity posts. That's really kind, but my job search is mostly in the city. I think I need to stay closer. She shrugged, clearly relieved I'd declined. Well, let me talk to Matt and see what we can do. Maybe we can help with a smaller amount. We finished our lattes, making small talk about her latest brand deals and the kids' after-school activities. But as I drove away, I knew she wouldn't call back. And if she did, it would be with a token offer, something small enough to make her feel generous without actually helping. Third name on the list. Third disappointment. And I was just getting started. Ethan was next. My older brother. The charming disaster. He's the kind of person who can light up a room and borrow $500 from 3 different people before the night's over, and then vanish like smoke. I'd bailed him out more times than I could count: rent, car repairs, emergency dental work, even one memorable weekend in Vegas that ended with a phone call from an unknown number at 2 in the morning. I decided to start with a text. Less pressure. Less chance for him to say no outright. I typed it carefully. Hey, Ethan. Something's happened and I could use your help. Can I call you later? He replied within 5 minutes, what's going on? I gave him the shortened version of my story, job gone, knee injury, medical bills, short 8,000. I hit send and waited. His reply came 30 seconds later, damn, that sucks, sis. I'm really tight right now myself. I'll call you later. Later never came asterisk. Asterisk by the next day, my follow-up texts went unanswered. 2 days later, my calls went straight to voicemail. I even tried messaging him on Facebook, just in case he'd blocked my number, no response. I knew his patterns too well. When Ethan didn't want to deal with something, he just didn't. He let it disappear until the other person either gave up or forgot why they were angry in the first place. It wasn't just the refusal to help. It was the total absence of even pretending to care. Not one, are you okay? Not one, I'll check in soon. Just, nothing. I wrote in my notebook, no offer. No follow-up. Avoidance. This was the same brother who'd called me crying 2 years ago because his rent was overdue and his car had been repossessed in the same week. I'd wired him $2,500 that night without asking for details. He never paid me back. Never even mentioned it again. As I closed the notebook, I realized my stomach was tight, not from anger, but from a deeper kind of ache. Disappointment is heavy. And when it's familiar, it's heavier still asterisk. 4 names down. For truths I couldn't unlearn. Aunt Helen wasn't even supposed to be next on my list. I'd planned to call her later, partly because I already knew her situation, retired, living on a fixed income, never one to splurge on herself. She was the last person I wanted to burden. But then my phone rang. It was her. Rachel, honey, I just heard from your mom about the job. Are you okay? Her voice was warm, steady, the kind of tone that makes you feel seen before you even answer. For a moment, I forgot to play the part. I'm hanging in there, I said, my throat tightening. And this time, the strain in my voice wasn't fake. Can you meet me for lunch tomorrow? My treat. I want to hear everything, she said without hesitation. We met at a small diner near her house, the kind with chipped coffee mugs and a waitress who calls everyone sweetheart. Aunt Helen looked the same as always, silver hair pulled into a loose ponytail, jeans, and a cardigan with a missing button. She hugged me like she meant it before we even sat down. Over lunch, she asked questions, not the kind that feel like an interrogation, but the kind that show she's actually listening. She didn't rush me. She didn't offer quick fixes. She just wanted to understand. When our plates were cleared, she reached into her purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. I want you to take this, she said, sliding it across the table. I opened it and froze. Inside was a stack of bills, $3,000 in cash. Aunt Helen. I can't take this, I said, my voice breaking. Nonsense. Family helps family. It's not the full amount you need, but it should get you through rent at least. I knew what that money meant. $3,000 wasn't just a number, it was nearly all her savings. And she was giving it to me without hesitation, without asking for a repayment date, without attaching strings. She reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. If you need a place to stay, my sofa pulls out into a bed. It's not fancy, but it's yours as long as you need it. I felt the tears come, hot and unfiltered. For the first time since starting this experiment, the emotion was real. As I drove home with that envelope in my bag, I thought about the difference between her and the rest of my family. The others had excuses. She had action. They had comfort. She had sacrifice. And I knew right then, whatever happened next, Aunt Helen would be the first to know my real secret. I didn't wait long. The next evening, I invited Aunt Helen to my apartment for dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and the apple pie she loved. When she arrived, she handed me a little paper bag with fresh rolls from the bakery near her house, the kind of small gesture that somehow meant more than any expensive gift. We ate at my tiny kitchen table, talking about nothing in particular, her volunteer work at the library, a neighbor's new puppy, the early snowstorm forecast for next week. But underneath it all, my mind kept circling the same thought: tell her. Tell her now. After we'd finished eating, I made us tea and we moved to the couch. She sat back, wrapping her hands around the mug for warmth, and smiled at me in that open, patient way of hers. "You look like you've got something on your mind, sweetheart," she said. I took a deep breath. My heart was thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I haven't been completely honest with you," I began. Her expression didn't change, still calm, still listening. "I didn't lose my job. My company's fine. I still have my position. The story I told you, about needing money, it wasn't true. I made it up." She didn't flinch. Just nodded slowly. "I see. Why?" "Because," my voice caught. "Because 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery. $62 million. And before I told anyone, I needed to know who in my life would be there for me if I had nothing." There was a pause, a soft, thoughtful kind of silence. Then she set her tea down, reached over, and took my hand. "I'm not angry," she said gently. "Sad, maybe. Sad that you felt you had to test people to know where you stand. But I understand." My eyes stung. "You were the only one who actually helped. Everyone else had excuses. Some didn't even bother calling me back." Her smile was tinged with something bittersweet. "People show you who they are when there's nothing in it for them. I learned that the hard way a long time ago." She told me about her ex-husband, about an inheritance he'd drained without her knowledge. About how she'd thought they were a team, only to realize she'd been standing alone the whole time. When she finished, she squeezed my hand. "Money doesn't just reveal others, Rachel. It reveals us, what we value, how we give, how we live. Don't let it change the best parts of you." I swallowed hard. "I want to help you. Your medical expenses, your house, whatever you need. Please let me do that." Her eyes softened. "Sweetheart, I don't need anything from you. I'm happy with my life. But knowing you're secure and happy, that's more than enough for me." I felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time since holding that winning ticket, I wasn't just rich. I was grounded. Seen. Understood. A week later, I sent out the messages. One to my father, one to my mother, one to Ethan, Chloe, and the rest of the usual circle. The words were simple: I need everyone to come to my apartment this Sunday. It's important. No explanation. No hints. I wanted them curious, and maybe a little nervous. By 2 p.m. on Sunday, they began to trickle in. My father arrived first with Linda in tow, her eyes scanning my small apartment like she was mentally drafting a renovation plan. My mother came next with Donald, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Chloe swept in wearing a designer coat, Ethan trailing behind her in a faded hoodie, avoiding my eyes. Even my cousins showed up, whispering to each other in the corner. And finally, Aunt Helen. She walked in last, giving me a small, secret smile as she took a seat near the door. I stood in the middle of the living room. The air felt thick with expectation. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. "I know there have been rumors about my financial situation. I wanted to address them directly." My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father crossed his arms. "The truth is, I'm fine. Better than fine. I have a new position with better pay and benefits." That much was technically true. My position was running the nonprofit I'd just founded, with myself as executive director. Faces relaxed. A couple of people even smiled, like they'd dodged a request for money. "But when I thought I was in trouble," I continued, "I reached out to some of you for help. Not advice. Not lectures. Help. And what I got in return was telling. A low murmur rippled through the room. I turned to my father. You gave me a 20-minute speech on financial responsibility. Not one offer of support. His jaw tightened. It's not my job to bail you out. I didn't ask you to bail me out, I said, cutting him off. I asked for help. There's a difference. I faced my mother. You told me you'd talk to Donald, and then nothing. Not even a follow-up call. Caroline's cheeks flushed. We have our own expenses. Like the new cabin? I said quietly. Her mouth snapped shut. Ethan tried to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. You ignored my messages entirely. Yet 2 years ago, when you needed $2,500 for rent, I sent it the same night you asked. Chloe crossed her arms. You're making this sound like we don't care. I'm telling you what happened, I replied evenly. You all showed me exactly where I stand in this family. Silence. Uncomfortable, heavy silence. I don't expect anything from any of you, I said finally. But from now on, I won't be the one you call when there's an emergency. That door is closed. One by one, they started making excuses to leave. No apologies. No sudden changes of heart. Just quiet exits. When the last of them was gone, Aunt Helen stayed behind to help me clear the cups and plates. That couldn't have been easy, she said softly. It wasn't, I admitted. But it was necessary. And for the first time I realized I hadn't just tested them. I'd set myself free. 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it did the night I stared at that winning ticket in my kitchen. I'd left my cramped apartment and moved into a modest but beautiful home in a quiet Denver neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion, just enough space for me to breathe, with a little garden in the back where I'd drink my coffee in the mornings and watch the sunrise over the Rockies. 3 blocks away, Aunt Helen had her own place now. A single-story craftsman with wide doorways for the days her arthritis made walking harder, and a porch where she liked to read in the afternoons. I made sure it was close enough that I could drop by whenever she needed, but far enough for her to feel truly independent. I'd founded a nonprofit called Second Circle, dedicated to helping seniors living alone, especially those who, like Helen, had been let down by the people who were supposed to care for them. We offered companionship, home repairs, and emergency funds. In our first year, we'd helped over 200 people in the Denver area. Helen volunteered at the nonprofit 3 days a week, running our community reading program. Watching her walk into a room and light it up with that same patient kindness she'd shown me made every challenge worth it. My relationship with the rest of my family had shifted. We still saw each other at holidays, exchanged polite birthday calls. But the illusion of closeness was gone, and with it, the constant ache of trying to earn something they'd never freely give. The boundaries were firm now, and I protected them fiercely. Sometimes, I thought about telling them the truth. About the lottery. About the test. But every time the temptation rose, I remembered the silence on the other end of the phone when I'd needed them. That silence had told me everything I needed to know. There were moments when I helped them anonymously, covering my father's medical bills after a heart scare, or paying for Ethan's rehab when he finally checked himself in. They never knew it was me, and I liked it that way. It wasn't about recognition. It was about doing the right thing without reopening old wounds. One crisp autumn evening, Helen and I sat on her porch, mugs of tea warming our hands. The mountains were painted gold and purple in the setting sun. She turned to me and said, "You know, if you'd told them right away, your life would have been completely different." I nodded. I would have been surrounded by people, but not by love. That's the thing, she said with a small smile. Money can buy attention. It can't buy truth. You've already got something more valuable than all the zeros in your bank account. She was right. The lottery had given me more than financial freedom, it had given me clarity. I no longer defined my worth by what I could give to people who took without giving back. I understood now that real love is the kind that stays when you have nothing to offer but yourself. And as the last light faded behind the mountains, I realized that this was my real jackpot, not the $62 million, but the peace of finally knowing where I belonged, and who belonged with me. If there's one thing this taught me, it's this: the people who truly love you will stand beside you when you have nothing to give. Everyone else? They're just passing through. Money didn't change my family, it only revealed who they already were. And that truth, as hard as it was, gave me peace. So, I'll ask you, who in your life would still be there if you lost everything tomorrow? Share your story in the comments, I read every single one. And if this hit home for you, like and share it with someone who needs to hear it.